What's good, my boy? Wanted to just come on here and do a little short and sweet video. Uh, Now, the title of this video, I'm not going to sit here and do some sort of a defense of any of this stuff. This is mainly for the people who have been given the understanding of these things or who are genuinely curious about the beauty within something like this rosary. Now, I'm not even going to go ahead and detail exactly what is a rosary and how you do it. I'm just going to go off the assumption that if someone's watching this, they already know that. But I've been trying for a long time now to do all three mysteries every day. And it's an extremely hard thing to do. You can say, oh, well, you can fit it in here or there, and you can just kind of go through it in the morning and then in the midday and then the night, and it's good that you get it done, right? And for the most part, that's kind of how I go about it. But I find sometimes I lack that true focus in the meditative aspect of the mysteries. My preferred way of saying the rosary is walking through my trails. There was a Bishop Williamson who talked about that aspect of the rosary, how it occupies the mind, the fingers, and the feet as you do it. And there is something incredibly impactful about that. But I mainly want to focus on the meditative aspects, in particular the sorrowful mysteries. Now, as we know, there's five mysteries there's five mysteries within each of the three major ones: the joyful, the sorrowful, and the glorious. But in the sorrowful is where we meditate upon Christ's passion. And with all the chaos going on in the world and all the craziness that we see every day, and we can get very external about things. And it's a great thing in prayer to pray on the externals, but I don't like to focus as much on the sinful nature of those said externals. Instead, I tend to try to focus inward on my own. I feel that to be the most healing way to do so. Of course, pray for the outside world, pray for others. I do that throughout while I do this. It comes to mind that it surfaces up to do it. But when we're truly given the grace as we're meditating upon these things to pinpoint certain things within ourselves, it has a healing aspect to the soul, unlike most things. Within the sorrowful mysteries, we have five. You start with the agony in the garden, then you move on to the scourging at the pillar, then you move on after that to the crowning with thorns, and then you move on to the carrying of the cross, and then finally you fall upon the crucifixion. And one way I kind of go about doing this is visuals I find are great. I see some Catholic things, certain apostolates, they'll even show like watching the Passion of the Christ, certain scenes they've cut them in to fit with this, and those are great. I mean, having those visuals, of course, they're not as graphic as the actual real thing, truly. If you actually study some of the literature on the wounds, or you look at the shroud itself, the wounds are so just... it's just way more intense. Even though that shows a very intense thing, they're actually way more brutal than we think or like to think. But as I meditate through the mysteries, starting at the agony in the garden, as we know Christ takes on the sins of the world, I like to meditate on through sins I've committed and contribute to that weight upon him. And we'll touch on that later once we get to the carrying of the cross. But as he's sitting there prostrated in the garden, I meditate on several different aspects, and I try to see who I relate to, because Christ is a very difficult figure to relate to. We aspire to be like him, but he's incredibly hard to relate to in the sense that we are so fallen. And I sometimes, as I'm meditating upon it, hoping that I'm certain figures and not other figures. You think about the ones that fell asleep, and that's often what we are. And as I meditate through them, I bring up sins and certain things, and I attribute that to the weight. And that's kind of how I go about it through the whole thing. The joyful and the glorious, they have a kind of a aspect to it where you're just so thankful, and it brings a sense of joy, right? As well as there's other things to consider, but I mean, that's kind of the emotion they bring forth. But with the sorrowful, it really gives you a time to just focus in on these things. And then you move to the scourging of the pillar, and it's highlighted no more clearly than that. Every time every time they strike him with the weapons that they used, and historically we know what type of weapons they would use in a scourging. Like there's the one where it has the weighted balls on it, which is just like a brute force hit, or the ones that claw in and rip the flesh away all over. And you think of the sins you commit all throughout your life that have that aspect to them, the ones that bruise and the ones that pierce. And that's kind of what I chew on as I go through. I think of my sins in particular. Sometimes I'll get in the mindset, I'll start to lose a little bit of humility, and I'll start to focus on other things that do that, and other people and all this stuff, and then I have to focus back in on no. Individual. This is an individual thing all across. And sometimes if you are given the grace, it can bring you to tears, honestly. Because that is, besides the carrying of the cross and the crowning with thorns, that's mainly the one we think of, and the crucifixion. That's the one where it's just, especially as depicted in the Passion, it's a small part in the Bible where it says it, but through what we look at in history, we can see it in its full scope. And that one is one where just kind of, that aspect can touch you deeply. Then moving on to the crowning with thorns, I sometimes think of this as like all those things I've done culminated into this piercing thing that pierces him, placed upon his head. And I don't really get too far down that rabbit hole of thinking that, but just symbolically thinking of it like that, and that no matter what, he still held them all the way to the cross. So I go about it with that mystery in that way. And then with the carrying of the cross itself, as we hear from other sources and even St. Padre Pio, he talks about his stigmata, which is the multiple wounds he bore. I think a stigma is when it's an individual thing, but the full wounds they call the stigmata. And he said the one that hurt the most was the cross, or the place on his shoulder where the cross was, how it tore his flesh to the bone. And I think about those weights of my sin, and I think about how despite that he still carried it onward. I think of the onlookers looking at who I would actually be and who I actually am at this present time. Am I the ones that are standing who just were praising him, saying Hosanna in the highest just a few days prior? Or am I the actual one or I aspire to be the one who gave him a drink of water? I aspire to that, and I also aspire to be the one who can carry my cross as well, even though I fall short so much in that. But that's kind of how I go about that one. And then whenever you finally get to the crucifixion, that beautifully cosmic image that holds all of our reality within it. I mean, that image in itself, we know the weight of it, that we are the ones who put him on that cross and continue to do so every day in our sin. You can think of the gratitude and also the remorse. But then also going back to relating to the figures around it and who you actually are. I think I'm like, am I the ones that are standing around laughing and looking around and not really caring and kind of unfocused? It's not a big deal or whatever. Am I a kind of a step above that, where I am the Roman who pierced his side, but through the grace his blood hit my face, and now I believe and am faithful? Or the ones I aspire to be, we all aspire to be, St. John, who stood by his mother, the only apostle to stand by, and at the foot of the cross, you kind of question those sorts of things within yourself. And even going back to the prior mysteries, you think of the apostles like Peter and all of these, and who you actually are in that moment. And it just causes a sense of reflection. And you will get these graces as you pray through it and you build that habit. You will get these graces that will allow certain things to surface that you haven't thought of in a long time. And you can be remorseful about that, and then eventually go and confess those sorts of things, of course. But it is just a sad picture, but it's also a sense of gratitude will arise from that meditative experience, especially on these mysteries, that sometimes you'll have a hard time with the other ones to do that, just because how much it's in your face when you are meditating upon those. And that's really how I go about it. Again, sometimes I think it's best to get the obedience aspect of prayer where you're actually doing it before you have these like super deep experiences and feelings with it. It is incredibly important. And when you do, it will just kind of deepen that relationship. I saw this video recently from an Orthodox monk. I think he was a monastic. He seemed to be. Where he details certain aspects as you come closer to Christ. And he describes, I think it was, who else was it? I think it might have been Origen, as well as even St. Paul at times will describe it like this. But Christ is this like light, almost in a lamp sense, where when you take an object and you put it up to the light, and you'll start to see, the closer it gets to the light, you see all of the imperfections in it. All of the imperfections. And it causes you, it starts to break down that pride. And you start to see yourself as a worm. And you don't stay there, though. That's the important thing, is you don't stay there. This is like a common misconception that people have for Catholics, or even Orthodox, or the traditional apostolic Christians, the real Christians. They think all we are is just like a big old pity party, but it's like a source of reflection that causes works. It causes love and charity, and it causes you to be more sympathetic to other people, right? And it's just a beautiful thing all around. But we also must have that aspect to not just be so down about it in a certain aspect. Be very remorseful and ask for forgiveness on these things. But at the same time, it should be a cause for change, a cause for, which is very hard. I know this is it's kind of like, yeah, that's the hardest aspect, dude. Yeah, it's extremely hard, but it should jolt you into action with certain things and changing how you behave within the world. So I thought I'd just come on here and share this short little sweet sentiment on the sorrowful mysteries. Anyway, y'all have a good one, boy. God bless.